drugs, or maybe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or hallucinating depression, or eating disorder, and for many young people now, self-harm, cutting themselves. So there's so many different avenues to this. But in the workplace, how can you recognise this if you feel that an employee has some sort of mental health problem? So if you notice maybe that they're becoming more withdrawn, or if they are struggling with their work, obviously, if they, there's so many different ways that you can tell if they feel very sad, or kind of down, depressed, or if they're real worriers, and that can all be signals that they have some sort of mental health problem. But in the workplace, the importance of having different avenues that you can get people talking about their feelings is huge, and it's obviously really going to help with the amount of people with their absences from work. And that's the main goal, because so many people have time off work. We all, are so quick to phone the doctor if we have a back problem or some sort of physical problem, but we're not so quick to phone the doctor if we have, or go and reach out perhaps somewhere if we have a mental, some sort of mental problem. So it's recognising that in ourselves and talking about these feelings, because once employers spend more time helping their employees, then they're going to get better. The people won't have so much time at work, and they'll be working, be much more productive, and much more focused on their work. But what is really important about talking about these feelings, and the way that I like to describe it to my clients is that if you imagine if you've got a line like this, and then there's a big gap like that, so it's just got this big hole. So when we are born, this hole is completely empty of feelings. And then when we are going through life, so when we start getting to school, little things happen. And if we're not taught to talk about our feelings, then this hole starts to fill up and fill up. So we go to school, and then, little things happen, and then this hole starts to fill up. And then we go to secondary school, become a teenager, and the hole gradually fills up and fills up and fills up, and then we become an adult, all these other things happen, and we're not talking and working through these past experiences. This hole starts to bubble over. These feelings have got to come out somehow, but otherwise we're just holding on to them. So it's having different ways that you can deal with that, because they're going to come out somehow. And for me, it was having an eating disorder. But for other people, it could be reaching out for alcohol, drugs, or it could be huge anxiety. If you get really stressed, that's a whole nother ball game, and it's going to help to bubble over. It can come out in so many different ways. So it's really important that we talk about our feelings. And then in the workplace, how can employers help people with mental health? They can have maybe mental health awareness days where they get a number of different therapists or people come in and practice, show people how to practice mindfulness, or they show people how to learn different ways to be able to cope with, say, anxiety. That's a huge one. Or another way would be to have workshops and get different people in, which is quite often what we do. Another avenue would be to have maybe the managers to have one-to-ones more with people if they don't feel like they're coping very well. Another way would be to assign a first aid worker, so like a go-to person. So everybody knows that they can go to that specific person to be able to have that one-to-one, to be able to open up a little and then figure out from there how they can get that help. So, but one of the big problems at the moment is anxiety. I think so many people now, after what we have been through over the last 2-3 years, anxiety for the majority of people is just built up and built up. But what is anxiety? So anxiety is a normal, natural emotion that we all have. It's that feeling, say, if you had to go and do a talk, a presentation, or you went for an interview. So you get the adrenaline has pumped through the body, cortisol has pumped through the body, and you get into that heightened state. And then after the event has passed, then you drop back down into your normal state. But then, nowadays, after the past, particularly, well, even before, but particularly for the last 2-3 years, we were locked down and the doors were open and we were locked down again, it's that fear of the unknown that is really one of the reasons why people's anxiety is kind of staying up at this level. And then now the cost of living and trying to be able to cope with that, and then the war in Ukraine bumbling along. So it's all really heightened for many people. They find it really difficult. They're just consistently staying in that heightened anxious state, and they're not dropping down into the normal natural state, because there's been one thing after another. And if they were anxious before the pandemic, then now their anxiety is going to be even at a high level and more consistent. It's as if they've got that car alarm going off, and they just have no switch to turn it off. But the good news, there is good news, that you can learn tools. You can learn different ways to be able to cope with your anxiety, to be able to get yourself into a calmer place. For example, you could learn mindfulness, which, it's been a buzzword for a long time, but a lot of people don't really understand how simple it is, but how powerful it is. It's fantastic, because actually changing, they've done so much research, and what a lot of the professors do, they do an MRI scan before, then they teach somebody an 8-week mindfulness course, and then they do another MRI scan, and they can find physical changes. The amygdala, which is part of that fight or flight that causes us to be in that anxious state, that part of the brain has shrunk. And another part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of our normal natural state, say, that part had become thicker, and the connection between the two had reduced. So there's physical changes by practicing mindfulness, but I know that I probably gave you the time out.